They call that one Mouse? She won't last past the mud pit, the general scoffed, loud enough for all to hear. But Casey Shaw said nothing. She only tightened the laces on her worn boots and stepped toward the starting line with steady resolve. The crowd fell silent. Dust hung in the air, the final seconds ticking down. Casey Shaw's small figure charged forward. She wasn't supposed to make it this far, but there she was, feet pounding the dirt, eyes locked on the finish line, lungs burning, heart steady. And when she crossed, the stopwatch froze. 12 seconds faster. The general, once laughing at her, now stood still and slowly removed his cap. What happened on that course, and how did a quiet, underestimated soldier outrun a legend? The American Southwest can be as merciless as any battlefield. Endless stretches of cracked earth, the sun and unblinking eye scorching everything below, and dust storms that rise like ghosts to swallow the horizon. It was here, at an isolated training base carved out of the unforgiving desert, that Casey Shaw began her journey, a journey no one believed she was equipped to survive. Casey Shaw was 25 years old, but at first glance she appeared younger. Standing barely 5 feet 2 inches tall, with a lean, wiry build, she could easily be mistaken for someone in over her head. The uniform hung a little loose on her narrow shoulders. Her boots seemed almost too heavy for her slight frame, and she spoke so softly that instructors often had to lean in just to catch her responses. It didn't take long for someone to mutter the nickname that would follow her like a shadow through the first brutal weeks of training. Mouse. The name stuck, and not kindly. Mouse wasn't a term of endearment at Camp Wallace. Here, recruits were forged through hardship, 110-degree heat, night drills through thorn brush, obstacle courses designed to break even the strongest. Being small, quiet, and reserved was seen as a disadvantage, something that made you prey in a place that demanded dominance. Casey never protested the nickname. She never tried to argue her way out of it or demand respect. Instead, she observed. She listened. While others competed to be heard, she memorized procedures, watched how the terrain shifted beneath their boots after a storm, learned where the ground gave way and where it held firm. She woke earlier than the others, running the perimeter of the base in the first light of dawn, long before reveille sounded. She stayed later, cleaning her rifle until it gleamed, practicing knots until her fingers ached, mapping the obstacle courses in her mind. Where others saw disadvantage, Casey saw opportunity. She understood what mice do best. They survive. They adapt. They find a way through, even when larger creatures fall. The other recruits dismissed her as a non-threat. The instructors barely noticed her beyond roll call. But in the silence, Casey Shaw was building something stronger than muscle. She was building resolve. And as the hot wind whipped across the training grounds of the Southwest, it carried the first whispers of a truth no one else could yet see. The mouse was preparing to outrun them all. Long before Casey Shaw earned the nickname Mouse, before she set foot on the blistered grounds of Camp Wallace, she carried a legacy on her narrow shoulders, a legacy shaped by absence, by sacrifice, and by quiet strength. Casey was born in a small town on the edge of central Texas, the youngest of 4 children. Her father, Captain Thomas Shaw, had left for Vietnam when Casey's mother was newly pregnant with her. He never came back. Official reports listed him as missing in action, presumed captured, but no confirmation ever came. His name was etched into a cold slab of black granite thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C. But for the Shaw family, he lived in the stories, in the photographs, in the folded flag kept in a cedar chest in their living room. Casey never met her father, but his presence filled their home. His medals hung on the wall above the dining table. His dog tags rested beside the Bible on her mother's nightstand. His discipline, his devotion, his values. Those were the rules Casey grew up with, enforced by a mother who refused to let her husband's memory fade. Her mother, Margaret Shaw, was a nurse at the local VA clinic. Small in stature but unshakable in will, Margaret raised 4 children on her own while working double shifts, rarely asking for help. She set the tone early. Every morning began at 4:30 a.m. with chores, stacking firewood, hauling water, cleaning the yard. Breakfast wasn't served until the day's first tasks were done. After school came rifle practice, not as a hobby, but as a duty. Your father believed in excellence, her mother would remind them. That doesn't change because he's gone. There was no room for self-pity in the Shaw household, no tolerance for complaints. Casey learned the power of silence early. When her brothers teased, she answered with action, not argument. When neighbors whispered about the poor, fatherless kids, she smiled politely and went about her work. When her legs burned during morning runs, she kept moving, breathing through the pain, focusing on each footfall. By the time Casey was old enough to sign enlistment papers, discipline wasn't something she put on like a uniform. It was part of her skin, her blood. The legacy of Captain Shaw and the quiet resilience of Margaret Shaw didn't just shape Casey. They became the foundation she would stand on when the world tried to count her out. In the silence of dawn, in the weight of memory, in the unwavering gaze of a daughter determined not to dishonor the sacrifices made before her, Casey Shaw found her purpose. Boot camp at Camp Wallace wasn't designed to build character. It was designed to break it. And from the moment Casey Shaw arrived, it seemed like the heat, the dust, and even the people conspired to grind her down. The first weeks were the worst. To her fellow recruits, Casey was invisible, or, worse, the punchline to a joke. The nickname Mouse spread like wildfire, whispered behind her back and sometimes loud enough for her to hear. "Hey, Mouse, try not to get lost in the mud pit. Careful, don't let a coyote carry you off." They chuckled at her small stature, mocked her quiet nature, and dismissed her before she even stepped onto the training field. The instructors didn't help. In the chaos of shouting orders and correcting mistakes, Casey's soft voice was easy to overlook. She was the recruit no one expected anything from, the one whose name was skipped over during demonstrations, the one who didn't get picked for team drills. She was background noise in a place where volume seemed to define value. But Casey never fought back with words. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, didn't waste energy trying to change minds that weren't ready to see beyond appearances. Instead, she worked harder. When others dragged themselves to the barracks after a grueling day, Casey stayed behind to run extra laps around the perimeter, pushing her legs until they trembled beneath her. When recruits collapsed on their bunks, grateful for a few stolen moments of rest, Casey crouched under the faint light of a flickering lamp, poring over field manuals and tactical guides, memorizing strategies, procedures, and terrain maps. She became a student of the land and of the craft, learning the angles of rope climbs, the rhythms of forced marches, and the ways to conserve energy in the heat that drained stronger bodies. While others complained about blisters or cursed the weight of their packs, Casey studied how to adjust her straps for better balance, how to tape her feet to prevent injury, how to pace herself so she could endure what others couldn't. What few noticed, at least at first, was that Casey's quiet determination extended beyond her own efforts. When a fellow recruit fumbled through disassembling his rifle, she knelt beside him without a word and demonstrated the proper sequence. When another struggled with tying a load-bearing harness, Casey's small hands worked swiftly, securing the straps before slipping back into the background. When someone dropped gear during a night march, Casey was the one who silently retrieved it and returned it without expecting thanks. Her kindness wasn't for show. Her assistance wasn't a plea for attention. It was simply who she was, a person raised to believe that strength was measured not in decibels, but in deeds. Day by day, Casey Shaw chipped away at the assumptions built up around her. The camp didn't notice at first, but the desert has a way of revealing what truly endures. And in that harsh, unrelenting world, Casey's quiet resilience began to speak louder than all the noise. The desert was both enemy and teacher. Its dry winds scraped at the skin, its heat sapped the strongest wills, and its nights, cold and unforgiving, reminded every recruit that comfort was a luxury left behind at the gates of Camp Wallace. But for Casey Shaw, the desert became something more, a silent partner in preparation. While others saw only misery in the cracked earth and endless dunes, Casey saw opportunity. The harshness of the land mirrored the challenges inside her mind. The doubts, the mockery, the low expectations placed on her shoulders. And just as she navigated the shifting sands, she learned to navigate and master those inner battles too. Casey trained when no one was watching. Before the first horn sounded at dawn, she was already awake, tying the laces of her boots, stepping out into the cool darkness. Her breath puffed into the air, mingling with the desert's pre-dawn stillness. She ran alone along the perimeter fence, each step measured, each lap purposeful. There was no audience, no praise, just the steady rhythm of boots on dirt, the growing strength in her legs, and the quiet voice inside that urged her forward. In the evenings, as the sky turned crimson and the camp settled into exhausted quiet, Casey didn't seek the company of the mess hall or the comfort of her bunk. Instead, she found corners of the base where she could train in peace, practicing rope climbs on the utility poles behind the supply shed, timing herself on obstacle mock-ups she built from discarded pallets and crates, or balancing with a weighted pack on the narrow beams of the old footbridge near the water tower. She didn't just run faster or longer, she ran smarter. Casey studied how her feet struck the ground to minimize fatigue. She learned to regulate her breathing, conserving energy over distance. She mapped the official obstacle course in her mind, step for step, imagining each climb, each wall, each pit as if she were already there, conquering them. Casey's preparation wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention, but it was relentless. She kept detailed notes in a battered pocket notebook, how the sand shifted after rain, how the wind changed at different times of day, which stretches of terrain sapped strength and which offered moments of recovery. She adjusted her gear again and again, testing strap positions, boot tightness, hydration timing, shaving off seconds in the small unseen details. What set Casey apart wasn't talent, it was intention. Every drop of sweat, every blister, every sore muscle was part of a plan. She wasn't training to impress her peers. She wasn't driven by the need to prove anyone wrong. Casey trained for herself, for the promise she'd made to her father's memory, and for the quiet conviction that one day, when the moment came, preparation would meet opportunity. And when it did, she would be ready. General Mitchell was a living legend at Camp Wallace. Even in retirement, his shadow loomed large over the training grounds. A tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and a voice like rolling thunder, Mitchell had once led special forces teams through the deadliest corners of the world. His exploits were whispered about by recruits like campfire tales, half truth, half myth. But one fact stood beyond question. No one had ever beaten his record on the mixed terrain endurance course. 30 years earlier, General Mitchell had completed the grueling 6-mile course through sand, rock, mud, and rope walls in a blistering 22 minutes flat. No recruit had come close since. Over the years, many tried, driven by ambition or pride, but the course always claimed their breath, their strength, and their hopes. Mitchell's record became more than a number on a board. It was a reminder of what true excellence looked like. When word reached the general that Casey Shaw, the small, soft-spoken recruit nicknamed Mouse, had registered to run the advanced endurance test, his reaction was predictable. "That kid," he said, setting down his coffee mug and shaking his head. "She won't last past the mud pit. Let her try. Fantasy sorts itself out real quick out there." The comment wasn't meant cruelly. To Mitchell, it was simply reality. He'd seen countless recruits break themselves on that course, and they were bigger, stronger, louder than the little one who kept to herself. But Casey hadn't signed up for the challenge on a whim. She hadn't been dared. She hadn't done it for attention. She signed up because she had spent every spare moment preparing for this test. Not to break a record, but to honor the standard her father would have expected of her. When Casey saw her name posted beside the test roster, she made no announcement, no boast. Instead, she quietly requested permission to train alone during the evening hours. The sergeants granted it with a shrug. Let the mouse have her fantasy. Yet one sergeant noticed and made a quiet report to Mitchell. "She doesn't run like she's chasing a record, sir," he said. "She runs like someone's waiting for her at the finish line." Those words stuck with the general, though he said nothing at the time. Over the next 2 weeks, while others joked or doubted, Casey mapped every inch of the course, timing transitions, studying obstacles. She ran simulations alone in the dark, in the cold, in the heat. She trained not for applause, but for mastery. By the time test day arrived, Casey Shaw wasn't a recruit taking a chance. She was a soldier meeting her moment. And as she approached the starting line, General Mitchell found himself watching more closely than he'd planned. Stopwatch in hand, curiosity in his eyes. The mouse was about to run, and the course would decide what fantasy and what fact really meant. The desert dawn broke with a strange stillness that morning. The usual winds that kicked up dust devils across Camp Wallace were absent. The air hung heavy and warm, as if even the land was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. Casey Shaw stood at the starting line, her small frame looking even smaller against the vastness of the course that stretched out before her. 6 miles of punishment designed to test not just muscle, but mind and spirit. The sun, low on the horizon, cast long shadows across the ground, and the digital timer above the starting post flickered in red, counting down the final minute before go time. Around her, a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread overnight. Mouse was going to run the course. Some came out of curiosity, some out of doubt, and a few with quiet hope, though none dared say it aloud. General Mitchell himself stood off to the side, arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable, stopwatch in hand. The bell rang, and with it, Casey launched forward, not with the explosive, pride-fueled sprint of so many before her, but with a steady, measured pace. Every movement had been practiced, refined. This was not a charge, it was execution. The first mile was sand, deep, soft dunes that swallowed energy with each step. Many recruits started fast here, only to find their legs failing before the halfway point. But Casey's shorter strides kept her feet from sinking too deeply. She kept rhythm with her breath. Let the sand guide her instead of fighting it. She passed the first checkpoint precisely on the pace she had planned. The second mile brought rocky outcrops and loose gravel paths that twisted ankles and shredded confidence. Here, Casey's countless hours studying foot placement paid off. She glided through sections where others stumbled, each step deliberate, every shift of weight calculated. The crowd fell quieter, their early murmurs fading to attentive silence. Then came the rope climb. 30 feet of knotted, worn rope, swaying slightly in the breeze. While others in past runs had tried to muscle their way up, burning out halfway, Casey used technique. Legs driving upward, arms steadying her progress, no wasted motion. At the top, she paused just long enough to breathe in the vastness of the course ahead before descending with controlled ease. Mile 4 was the infamous mud pits. Thick, heavy earth that clung to boots, sapped strength, and destroyed morale. But Casey had trained for this too, filling sandbags to drag through similar muck behind the mess hall during her evening sessions. She kept her movements compact, minimal. No high steps to waste energy, just a relentless push forward, emerging from the last pit cleaner than most, and without the extra weight of caked mud slowing her down. The 5th mile was the rope wall, 18 feet of netting stretched tight, a final barrier before the home stretch. Casey's grip strength, built quietly in hours no one else noticed, saw her ascend with spider-like precision, not pausing, not slipping. Now the final stretch lay before her. Flat ground, the finish line visible in the distance, the red digits of the timer ticking down. The crowd grew louder, voices rising in disbelief, then anticipation. Casey's breathing was controlled, her stride unwavering. She hadn't just conserved strength, she'd planned for this very moment. As she neared the end, the air seemed electric. General Mitchell's hand hovered over his stopwatch, eyes narrowed in focus, no longer doubting but measuring, witnessing, and then she crossed. The stopwatch froze. The silence was deafening. Casey Shaw had done it, faster than any had dared imagine. And in that stillness, the desert bore witness to the day the mouse outran the legend. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stop. Casey Shaw's boots skidded to a halt beyond the finish line, dust rising around her legs, the dry air thick with silence. All eyes fixed on the glowing numbers of the digital timer overhead, its red digits frozen as if stunned by what they displayed. 21 minutes, 48 seconds, 12 seconds faster than the record that had stood like a monument for 3 decades. The crowd, at first too shocked to react, erupted all at once. Cheers, gasps, and stunned laughter mingled with the desert wind. Recruits who had once whispered "mouse" as a joke now shouted her name in admiration. Even those who had doubted her couldn't help but join the swell of respect that rippled through the gathered ranks. Casey didn't raise her arms in victory. She didn't let out a triumphant cry. Instead, she bent slightly forward, hands on her knees, steadying her breath, eyes closed for a moment as if offering silent thanks. For the strength that had carried her, for the preparation that had paid off, for the promise she had kept to herself. General Mitchell stood still, his broad frame outlined against the golden horizon. The stopwatch in his hand seemed heavier now, the weight of history pressing against his palm. His sharp eyes softened, and with a slow, deliberate motion, he removed his cap. This wasn't just respect. It was acknowledgement. From a man who had once set the standard, now recognizing someone who had met it and surpassed it. Mitchell stepped forward, boots crunching on the dry earth, until he stood before Casey. The crowd quieted again, sensing the significance of the moment. "Well, Shaw," he said, his voice no longer carrying amusement or doubt, but something closer to pride. "Looks like the mouse roared." Casey straightened, dust clinging to her uniform, face flushed but composed. She met the general's gaze, steady and calm. "With respect, sir," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It never was a nickname that fit." The general's grin was slow, genuine. He extended his hand, not as superior to subordinate, but as one soldier to another. Casey took it, her grip firm, the shake brief but meaningful. In that moment, a record had been broken, but something more important had been built, a bridge of respect between generations of soldiers. The other recruits surged forward then, slapping Casey on the back, offering high fives and handshakes. Even those who had mocked her the most seemed eager to claim a small piece of her achievement. But Casey remained humble, accepting their congratulations with a nod, her mind already reflecting on the path that had brought her here. The sun dipped lower, casting the course in long shadows, but the legend of the day was just beginning to take shape. Later, as the dust settled and the crowd dispersed, someone changed the record board by the training grounds. Mitchell's name still stood, but beside it, in bold letters, now weathering the same sun and sand, was Casey Shaw. The course hadn't just revealed the fastest time. It had revealed character, discipline, and quiet strength. The kind that doesn't need to shout because its actions speak louder than any voice. Casey Shaw hadn't run for applause. She hadn't run for the record. She had run for the promise she made every dawn, every dusk, in every silent hour of preparation. To honor those who believed in her and to prove that the underestimated can achieve the extraordinary. And in doing so, she didn't just break a record. She set a new standard. When Casey Shaw crossed that finish line, she didn't just break a time on a stopwatch. She shattered an idea, one far older and harder to crack than any record. The idea that strength must be loud, that leadership must be boastful, that success belongs only to those who demand attention. What I find most powerful about Casey's journey is how much it mirrors the quiet battles so many people fight every day. The single parent working 2 jobs, the elderly veteran who volunteers at the community center without seeking recognition, the neighbor who helps in small, unseen ways. Casey's story reminds us that true strength doesn't always come dressed in fanfare. Sometimes it comes in silence, in consistency, in the decision to keep showing up, no matter how small or dismissed you feel. I've met people like Casey. Maybe you have too. I think of a friend's father, a man who never spoke about his service in Korea, but who mowed the lawns of 3 widows on his block every weekend, without fail. Or the nurse who stayed after hours to sit with frightened patients, even though no one ever asked her to. There's something about quiet strength that resonates deeply with us once we slow down enough to notice it. In a world that often celebrates the loudest voice in the room, we forget that it's usually the quiet ones who are doing the hard work that truly matters. Casey's victory wasn't flashy. She didn't pound her chest or demand headlines. She broke the record because she prepared. She endured. She honored the values she'd been raised with. Work hard, stay humble, let your actions speak for you. And maybe that's why her story is so inspiring. Because it tells us we don't need permission to be excellent. We don't need the spotlight to make a difference. What we need is commitment, preparation, the will to outwork the doubters, not for their approval, but because we know what we're capable of. General Mitchell learned that day. The recruits who teased Casey learned it too. And maybe as we reflect on her example, we're reminded that the world doesn't just need louder heroes, it needs more quiet ones. So I'll ask you, where have you seen a Casey Shaw in your own life? Or maybe you're that quiet hero, working, striving, never asking for applause. If so, let this be your reminder. The work matters, the preparation matters. And one day, like Casey, you'll cross a finish line that no one saw coming, and the world will have no choice but to stop, look, and respect what you've built in silence. In the days that followed Casey Shaw's record-breaking run, Camp Wallace felt changed. It wasn't just the number on the course record board that was different, it was the atmosphere. The recruits, instructors, even visiting officers spoke of the run with a new kind of reverence. Not because of the time Casey had posted, but because of how she had done it. Her quiet preparation, her steady resilience, her refusal to seek recognition, all of it left a lasting imprint on everyone who witnessed or heard about that day. For the first time in years, the obstacle course wasn't seen as just a physical challenge. It became a symbol of inner strength, of what could be accomplished through discipline and quiet dedication. But Casey didn't linger in the glow of her achievement. She declined interview requests, turned down offers to be paraded as a symbol of camp pride. When asked why, her answer was simple. The time speaks for itself. My job is to keep getting better. Instead, she focused on using her experience to help others. Casey began volunteering to mentor recruits who were struggling, especially the quiet ones, the ones who reminded her of herself. She'd meet them before dawn or after hours, showing them how to break tasks down, how to prepare without burning out, how to silence the voice of doubt with action. She insisted that no one be given easier standards based on size, gender, or background. The course doesn't care who you are, she told them, and neither should your training. Excellence belongs to anyone willing to earn it. Over time, Casey's methods began to influence how Camp Wallace approached instruction. New recruits were taught that strength came in many forms, not just in volume or size. Instructors started watching more closely for the quiet ones, the steady ones, the ones who led by example rather than by voice. 3 years after Casey set her record, another quiet soldier broke it. Someone who had trained in the shadows using Casey's methods. And when that happened, Casey was the first to be at the finish line, offering a firm handshake and a small, knowing smile. General Mitchell, now retired, wrote a formal request to rename the endurance course. It was approved. From then on, the course was no longer known as Mitchell's Run. It became the Shaw Course. And on the dedication plaque, just beneath Casey's name, were the words she lived by. Let your work speak, let your strength be quiet. Her legacy wasn't just about a record. It was about a standard, one that continues to inspire every recruit who steps up to the starting line, takes a deep breath, and remembers what the mouse taught them. That quiet determination can outrun anything. Casey Shaw's story is more than a tale of breaking records. It's a reminder that the most powerful victories often come without applause, without headlines, and without fanfare. It's about the quiet ones, the people who work in the shadows, who prepare when no one's watching, who choose persistence over pride and purpose over praise. In a world that often celebrates noise, Casey's legacy asks us to look deeper. It challenges us to recognize strength in its quieter forms. In the parent who rises early to provide, in the neighbor who helps without being asked, in the colleague who lifts others up without needing credit. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever been told you were too small, too quiet, too different to succeed, let this be your reminder. Your actions define you, not their assumptions. Like Casey, you don't have to argue, boast, or demand respect. You earn it through preparation, through consistency, through showing up and doing the work. I encourage you, take a moment today to reflect on the Casey Shaws in your life. Who are the people quietly making a difference? And if you see a bit of Casey in yourself, keep going. Your finish line is closer than you think. If this story inspired you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and if you've known a quiet hero who deserves to be celebrated. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us here at Silent Valor Stories, where we honor stories of strength that doesn't need to shout. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.